The gunshot echoed through the valley as Catherine Blackwood ducked behind her father's overturned wagon, heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. This wasn't how her journey west was supposed to end, alone in the wilderness of Wyoming Territory. 1875. With her father's lifeless body cooling in the dust and bandits ransacking their belongings. Catherine peered around the splintered wood, her honey-blonde hair falling across her face as she counted the remaining outlaws. 3 men still rummaged through her family's possessions, laughing and tossing aside anything that didn't shine or jingle. The 4th lay motionless nearby, felled by her father's last desperate shot before they gunned him down. "Check for the girl," one of them called out, his voice like gravel. Martin swore he saw a woman with the old man. Catherine's breath caught. She had seconds to decide: stay hidden and pray they wouldn't find her, or run while their attention was divided. The tall grass beyond the wagon beckoned, if she could reach it. She gathered her skirts, muscles tensing to spring when a whistle pierced the air. Not human, a signal. The bandits froze. "Someone's coming," hissed one of them, abandoning the trunk he'd been plundering. Catherine risked a glance skyward. A plume of dust approached from the north, moving fast. A rider. "Let's go," the leader snapped, grabbing what valuables he could carry. "We got what we came for." The outlaws mounted quickly, spurring their horses south, away from the approaching figure. Catherine remained frozen, uncertain if the newcomer represented salvation or further danger. The rider crested the hill at a gallop, a lone horseman on a powerful chestnut stallion. He rode low in the saddle, his form fluid with his mount as they descended toward the massacre site. A worn Stetson cast shadows across his face, but she could make out a strong jaw lined with stubble beneath. A Winchester rifle rested across his saddle, and a Colt revolver hung at his hip. He slowed as he approached, scanning the scene with practiced efficiency. Catherine shrank back, but her movement caught his eye. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with surprising lightness for such a tall man. "You can come out," he called, his voice deep but gentle. "They're gone now." Catherine hesitated, eyeing the distance to the grass again. "I'm not going to hurt you, madam," he added, removing his hat to reveal dark hair and eyes that seemed to see right through her hiding place. "But if you run, you won't make it far, not out here." She knew he spoke the truth. With nothing but wilderness for miles and no horse, she'd be dead by nightfall. Slowly, Catherine emerged from behind the wagon, her father's small derringer clutched in her trembling hand. She pointed it directly at the stranger's chest. "That's far enough," she commanded, proud that her voice didn't betray her terror. The man stopped, raising his hand slightly, his expression calm. "You're right to be cautious." "Who are you?" Catherine demanded. "Name's Jackson Reeves. Most folks call me Jack. What do you want?" His eyes moved past her to the body of her father, then back to her face. Compassion flickered across his features. "Right now, to help bury your dead and get you somewhere safe before those men decide to circle back." Catherine's arm wavered, the small gun suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. "I don't even know you," she said, her voice catching. The cowboy replied with a small, sad smile. "You don't have to yet." For reasons Catherine couldn't explain, the simple words cut through her panic. She slowly lowered the derringer. "My father," she said, glancing back at the still form. "I'll help you lay him to rest proper," Jack promised. "But first we should move away from the road. Those men might have friends." Catherine nodded numbly. Jack approached cautiously, his movements deliberate, like he was approaching a spooked horse. "Is there anything you need from the wagon?" he asked. Catherine thought of the small trunk containing her mother's locket, the family Bible, and the few remaining mementos of her life back east. "Yes, there's a trunk. It has my personal belongings." Jack nodded and moved to the overturned wagon. With powerful arms, he righted the smaller of the trunks and checked its contents. "This one?" she nodded. "I'll secure it to my horse. Can you ride?" "Yes," Catherine answered. "My father taught me." "Good," Jack said, lifting the trunk with surprising ease. "We'll ride double until we can find you a mount." As Jack secured her trunk to his saddle, Catherine knelt beside her father. His face was peaceful despite the violence of his death. She closed his eyes with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered. "I'll make it to Silver Creek like we planned. I promise." Jack approached with a folded blanket. "We'll need to wrap him," he said gently. Together, they prepared her father's body in silence. Jack dug a grave beneath a solitary elm tree, the only landmark for miles in the rolling prairie. Catherine watched as the stranger worked tirelessly under the brutal Wyoming sun, sweat soaking his cotton shirt. When the grave was deep enough, Jack helped her lower her father into the earth. Catherine recited what she could remember of the Lord's Prayer, her voice barely audible over the prairie wind. Jack stood with his hat against his chest, head bowed respectfully. As the last shovelful of dirt fell on the grave, Catherine felt a crushing finality. Her father had been her last family, her anchor in the world. Now she was truly alone, at the mercy of a stranger whose true nature she couldn't begin to guess. Jack fashioned a crude cross from broken wagon parts and hammered it into the freshly turned earth. "Henry Blackwood," Catherine supplied when he looked to her questioningly. 1830 to 1875. Jack carved the information with his knife, then stepped back. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Blackwood." "Catherine," she said automatically. "Everyone calls me Catherine." He nodded once. "We should go. Daylight's burning, and we've got at least 3 hours' ride to the nearest town." Catherine looked at him directly for the first time, studying the weathered face that couldn't be much older than 30. His eyes were a deep blue, like the Wyoming sky after a storm, and they held a weariness that spoke of hard years. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Jack's expression remained impassive. "Because it's what decent folks do." He offered his hand. "Now, let's get you somewhere safe before nightfall." With one last look at her father's grave, Catherine placed her hand in Jack's and allowed him to help her onto his horse. She settled behind him, awkwardly placing her hands at his waist as the chestnut stallion adjusted to the additional weight. "Hold tight," Jack instructed, and Catherine had no choice but to grip him more firmly as the horse began to move. As they rode away from the site of her world's collapse, Catherine fought back tears. She didn't know this man, couldn't trust that his intentions were pure, yet she had no choice but to follow him. Her survival depended on a stranger whose very existence she hadn't known hours before. The rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them and the solid presence of the cowboy before her were the only constants in a world suddenly turned to chaos. Catherine closed her eyes against the setting sun and prayed she hadn't made a terrible mistake. The town of Whispering Pines appeared on the horizon just as twilight deepened into night. A collection of wooden buildings straddling a dusty main street. It was smaller than Catherine had expected, but a welcome sight nonetheless. Lanterns glowed in windows, and the distant sound of piano music drifted from what she assumed was the local saloon. "It's not much," Jack said, breaking the long silence between them. "But Sheriff Mills is a good man, and Mrs. Abernathy runs a clean boarding house for respectable women." Catherine nodded against his back, too exhausted for words. The hours of riding had left her stiff and sore, unused to such prolonged travel. Her grief sat like a stone in her chest, heavy and unyielding. They drew curious glances as they rode down the main street. A woman riding behind a man like this would be the subject of gossip by morning, Catherine knew, but propriety seemed a distant concern compared to survival. Jack guided his horse to a modest two-story building with a hand-painted sign reading Abernathy Boarding House. He dismounted and helped Catherine down, her legs nearly buckling as they touched the ground. "Easy," he murmured, steadying her with a gentle hand at her elbow. "You've had a hard day." Catherine straightened her spine and withdrew from his touch. "I'm fine," she insisted, though they both knew it for the lie it was. Jack retrieved her trunk and led the way to the boarding house door. A bell tinkled as they entered, and a plump woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun looked up from her ledger. "Jack Reeves," she said, her tone suggesting a long acquaintance. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." "Evening, Mrs. Abernathy," he replied, setting down Catherine's trunk. "This is Miss Catherine Blackwood. She needs a room." The older woman's shrewd eyes took in Catherine's disheveled appearance and tear-stained face. "I see," she said, her expression softening slightly. "What happened, child?" Catherine opened her mouth to explain but found she couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. "Outlaws," Jack supplied quietly. "Hit her wagon on the North Road. Her father didn't make it." Mrs. Abernathy's face creased with genuine sympathy. "Oh, you poor dear." She came around the counter and took Catherine's cold hands in her warm ones. "You'll stay here tonight, of course." "I've got a room ready." "I can't," Catherine began, suddenly remembering her practical situation. "Most of our money was taken." "We'll sort that out tomorrow," Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. "For tonight you need rest and a hot meal." Jack cleared his throat. "I'll cover her lodging for the week," he said, "and I'll speak with Sheriff Mills about what happened." Catherine turned to him, surprised. "Mr. Reeves, I can't accept." "It's just Jack," he interrupted. "And yes, you can. You'll pay it back when you're on your feet again, Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "That's settled then. Come along, Miss Blackwood. I'll show you to your room and have Betsy bring up some hot water for washing." Catherine knew she should protest further, maintain some independence, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. She managed a nod to Jack. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything today." Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps surprise at her gratitude. "Get some rest," he replied. "I'll check on you tomorrow." As Mrs. Abernathy led her upstairs, Catherine glanced back to see Jack watching her, his expression unreadable. Then he settled his hat back on his head and stepped out into the night, leaving her with more questions than answers about the mysterious cowboy who had saved her life. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Catherine sat motionless on the edge of the bed after Mrs. Abernathy left, staring at her hands in her lap. They were dirty, with dried blood in the creases her father's blood. The reality of her situation crashed over her anew. A soft knock announced a young maid with steaming water. Mrs. Abernathy sent this up, and some stew too." Catherine thanked her automatically. When the door closed, she washed mechanically, watching the water turn brown with dust and red with blood. She changed into the nightgown Mrs. Abernathy had provided, but couldn't bring herself to eat. Instead, she opened her trunk and withdrew her father's battered journal. Their plan had been clear. Reach Silver Creek, where her father's old army friend owned a ranch and had offered them a fresh start. After her mother's death from consumption 2 years prior, there had been nothing left for them in Boston. The West represented hope. Now, Catherine was alone, 3 days' ride from Silver Creek with no horse, little money, and only the name of a man who might or might not honor a decade-old promise to her father. She closed the journal and extinguished the lamp. In the darkness, lying on an unfamiliar bed, Catherine finally allowed the tears to come. She wept silently until exhaustion claimed her, pulling her into a fitful sleep haunted by gunshots and the memory of a stranger's blue eyes. Morning arrived with the sound of wagons and horses on the street below. Catherine woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until reality crashed back. She dressed quickly in her only other clean dress, a practical navy cotton that had somehow survived the journey intact. Mrs. Abernathy greeted her with coffee and biscuits in the small dining room downstairs. "You look a sight better with some sleep," the older woman said kindly, "though you're still pale as milk." "Thank you for your hospitality," Catherine replied, sipping the strong coffee gratefully. "Jack stopped by early," Mrs. Abernathy mentioned, watching Catherine's reaction closely. "Said the sheriff's organized a posse to look for those outlaws. They rode out at dawn." Catherine's hand trembled slightly. "Does he think they'll catch them?" "Hard to say. Jack's the best tracker in 3 counties, but those men have a head start." Mrs. Abernathy refilled Catherine's cup. "He also left this for you." She produced a small leather pouch that clinked when she set it on the table. Catherine opened it to find a modest sum of money inside. "I can't accept this," she protested. "He said you'd say that," Mrs. Abernathy replied with a hint of amusement. "Said to tell you it's a loan, not charity, and you can pay him back when you reach Silver Creek." Catherine frowned. "How did he know I was headed to Silver Creek?" "Jack Reeves knows more than he lets on about most things," was all Mrs. Abernathy would say. "Now, tell me about your plans. Were you meeting someone there?" Catherine explained about her father's friend James Thornton and the standing invitation to join his ranch operation. "Thornton's place." Mrs. Abernathy looked surprised. "That's one of the biggest spreads in the territory. Your father must have been good friends indeed." "They served together in the war," Catherine said. "Papa saved his life at Gettysburg." Mrs. Abernathy nodded thoughtfully. "Well, that's something solid to work with. The stage goes through Silver Creek twice a week. Next one's tomorrow morning." Catherine calculated quickly. The money Jack had left would cover the stage fare with some to spare. "Then I'll be on it," she decided. "In the meantime, Mrs. Abernathy continued, "you might want to visit Henderson's Mercantile. You'll need supplies, and old man Henderson might know something about your father's friend." Catherine spent the morning at the Mercantile, selecting necessities with careful attention to her limited funds. Mr. Henderson, a garrulous man with spectacular whiskers, confirmed that Thornton Ranch was indeed prosperous. "Runs about 5,000 head of cattle," he told her. "Employs 20 men year-round, more during branding and roundup. If you're expected, you'll be well situated there." The information was reassuring. Catherine purchased what she needed and was arranging to have it delivered to the boarding house when the shop door opened, bringing with it a gust of wind and dust and Jack Reeves. He looked trail-worn, his clothes dustier than the day before, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. "Miss Blackwood," he greeted, removing his hat. "Good to see you up and about." "Mr. Reeves," she acknowledged, suddenly conscious of her plain dress and hastily arranged hair. "Mrs. Abernathy said you rode out with the sheriff." "We tracked those outlaws about 15 miles south before losing the trail at the river," he explained. "Sheriff's still looking, but I figured you might need some assistance today." Catherine straightened. "That's very kind, but I've managed. I've purchased my stage ticket for tomorrow and secured the necessary supplies." If her brisk tone disappointed him, Jack didn't show it. He merely nodded. "Smart planning. Silver Creek's a 3-day journey by stage." "You knew my destination," Catherine said, not bothering to hide her suspicion. "How?" Jack shifted, looking momentarily uncomfortable. "Your father mentioned it before he passed. Said you were headed to Thornton's place." Catherine frowned. "That's impossible. My father was already dead when you arrived." Jack's expression remained carefully neutral. He wasn't quite gone when I got there. Had just enough breath to ask me to help his daughter get to Silver Creek. The revelation that her father hadn't died instantly, that he'd spoken to this stranger while she hid, struck Catherine like a physical blow. She swayed slightly, gripping the counter for support. "Miss Blackwood." Jack moved toward her, concern evident in his voice. "I'm fine," she said automatically, though she was anything but. I didn't know he was still alive when you came." Jack's face softened with understanding. "He didn't suffer long," he assured her. "Just long enough to know you were safe." Catherine nodded, unable to speak past the renewed grief clogging her throat. Mr. Henderson, who had been pretending not to listen, cleared his throat. "I'll have these things sent over to Mrs. Abernathy's right away, Miss Blackwood." "Thank you," she managed. Jack gestured toward the door. "May I walk you back to the boarding house?" Catherine hesitated. Something about Jack Reeves unsettled her, not in a frightening way, but in a manner that made her acutely aware of herself in his presence. Still, she couldn't deny he had been nothing but helpful. "Yes, thank you," she finally agreed. They walked side by side down the boardwalk, careful not to touch. Catherine was intensely conscious of the curious glances from townspeople, the whispers that followed in their wake. "People are staring," she murmured. "Small towns run on gossip," Jack replied without concern. "By supper time, half will be convinced we're secret lovers, and the other half will think I'm your long-lost brother." Despite everything, Catherine felt a bubble of laughter rise in her throat. "And which would you prefer?" Jack's step faltered for a moment, his blue eyes snapping to her face with surprise. Then his mouth curved into a genuine smile, the first she'd seen from him, transforming his serious features. "Neither, Miss Blackwood," he answered honestly. "I prefer they mind their own business, but that's not the way of small towns." They reached the boarding house and Catherine paused at the steps. "Thank you for the money," she said. "It's a loan, as Mrs. Abernathy explained. I'll repay you once I'm settled." Jack nodded. "No rush." He seemed about to say more, then changed his mind. "Will you be at supper tonight? Mrs. Abernathy sets a good table." "Yes, I believe so." "Then perhaps I'll see you there." He settled his hat back on his head and stepped back. "Good day, Miss Blackwood." Catherine watched him walk away, his broad shoulders straight beneath his worn jacket. She couldn't fathom why a man like Jack Reeves would go to such lengths for a stranger. Despite his explanation about her father's dying request, something didn't quite add up. As she turned to enter the boarding house, Catherine caught sight of a poster affixed to the community board beside the door. It showed a crude drawing of a man's face beneath the bold words "Wanted, dead or alive." The name printed below was unmistakable: Jackson Reeves. Catherine stared at the poster in shock. The picture bore only a passing resemblance to her rescuer, but the description matched: 6 feet tall, blue eyes, scar through right eyebrow. The bounty was substantial: $500 for armed robbery and murder in Colorado territory. Her breath caught. Had she been rescued by an outlaw? Was Jack Reeves simply biding his time before robbing her of what little she had left? The mounting questions made her head spin. As she reached to tear down the poster, a voice stopped her. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Sheriff Mills stood a few feet away, watching her with knowing eyes. "That there's official business." Catherine's hand froze. "This man," she said carefully, "is he truly wanted?" The sheriff stepped closer, studying the poster. "Depends on who you ask. Some say Jack Reeves is a cold-blooded killer. Others say he was framed by a corrupt judge in Colorado." He glanced at Catherine. "I take it you've met our local mystery man." "He saved my life yesterday," Catherine admitted. "Helped bury my father after outlaws attacked our wagon." Sheriff Mills nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like the Jack Reeves I know. Been in these parts about 2 years." Keeps to himself mostly, works odd jobs, helps folks in trouble. He tapped the poster. I've had this for 18 months. Could have arrested him any time. Why haven't you? Catherine asked. The sheriff's weathered face crinkled in a half-smile. Let's just say I've got my doubts about what happened in Colorado. Jack's never caused trouble here, and he's pulled more than one person out of a bad spot. He pinned Catherine with a shrewd look. Including you, it seems. Catherine glanced down the street where Jack had disappeared. Who is he really? That, said Sheriff Mills, is something you'd have to ask him yourself. But I will say this: whatever Jack Reeves did or didn't do in his past, he's a man I'd trust with my life in the present. He tipped his hat to her. Good day, Miss Blackwood. Catherine entered the boarding house with her thoughts in turmoil. The man who had saved her, who had treated her with nothing but respect and kindness, was wanted for murder. Yet the sheriff, who should be most concerned with upholding the law, seemed to trust him implicitly. She climbed the stairs to her room, wondering if she would still have the courage to face Jack Reeves at supper, and what she would say if she did. Supper at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house was a communal affair. The large oak table in the dining room seated 12, and tonight it was full. Catherine found herself between a young schoolteacher and an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as the town's only dentist. Across from her sat a cattle buyer from Cheyenne and his wife. Jack Reeves entered just as Mrs. Abernathy began serving the roast beef. He nodded politely to the assembled diners, his eyes lingering briefly on Catherine before he took the only available seat at the far end of the table. Catherine found it difficult to concentrate on the conversation around her. She pushed food around her plate, responding automatically to questions while stealing glances at Jack. He ate quietly, occasionally contributing to the discussion but mostly observing. You've barely touched your food, dear, Mrs. Abernathy noted as she refilled water glasses. Are you feeling unwell? Just tired, Catherine replied with a forced smile. Everything is delicious. The cattle buyer, Mr. Simmons, leaned forward. Mrs. Abernathy tells us you're bound for Silver Creek tomorrow. Thornton's ranch, specifically. Catherine nodded. Yes, Mr. Thornton was a friend of my father's. Fine outfit, Simmons commented. I buy from him regular. Good stock, fair prices. He glanced at his wife. We're headed that direction ourselves, taking the morning stage. Yes, Catherine confirmed. Excellent, Mrs. Simmons beamed. We'll have company for the journey. Always preferable to travel with companions, especially for a young lady alone. Catherine felt a wave of relief. The prospect of traveling with the respectable couple eased some of her concerns about the journey ahead. The stage can be rough going, Jack's voice carried from the end of the table. 3 days of hard travel, especially this time of year with the spring rains making the roads muddy. Mr. Simmons nodded. True enough, Mr. Reeves, but Miss Blackwood seems a hardy sort. Catherine felt Jack's eyes on her. She is, he agreed quietly. After dinner, Catherine stepped onto the boarding house's small back porch, needing fresh air and a moment alone. The night was clear, stars speckling the vast Wyoming sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Beautiful night. Jack's voice came from the shadows, startling her. Catherine tensed but didn't retreat as he stepped into view, leaning against the porch railing a respectful distance away. Yes, she agreed. We don't see stars like this in Boston. Is that home for you? He asked. It was, Catherine said. Not anymore. They stood in silence for a moment, the night sounds of the small town washing over them, distant piano music, a dog barking, the creak of a windmill. I saw the wanted poster, Catherine finally said, deciding directness was the only approach. With your name on it. Jack didn't seem surprised. He nodded slowly, his profile illuminated by the light spilling from the kitchen window. I wondered if you would. Are you going to deny it? No. His answer was simple, unembellished. Catherine turned to face him fully. Did you do what they say? Rob that bank, kill those men? Jack met her gaze steadily. I robbed the bank. I didn't kill anyone. Then why the judge's son was the real killer, Jack explained, his voice flat. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, made a convenient scapegoat. He looked away. I'm not innocent, Catherine. I was there to rob the bank, but I never fired my weapon. The use of her first name didn't escape her notice. Why tell me this? Jack pushed away from the railing, moving closer but still maintaining a proper distance. Because you asked, and because I want you to know who helped you, for better or worse. Sheriff Mills seems to believe your version of events, Catherine observed. A ghost of a smile touched Jack's lips. Mills is a good judge of character, better than most. And what am I to make of your character, Mr. Reeves? Catherine asked, surprising herself with her boldness. That's not for me to say, he replied. But I hope you know I mean you no harm, never did. Catherine studied him in the dim light. Logic told her to be wary of this man with his mysterious past and the price on his head, yet something deeper, more instinctive, trusted him. The stage leaves at 8 tomorrow, she said finally. I should rest. Jack nodded, stepping back. Safe travels to Silver Creek, Miss Blackwood. As Catherine turned to go inside, she paused. Will I see you before I leave? Was that disappointment that flickered across his face. No, he said. I'm riding out tonight, ranch work waiting for me north of here. I see. Catherine was surprised by her own sense of loss. Then this is goodbye. It is. Jack hesitated, then added, I hope you find what you're looking for at Thornton's. Catherine nodded. Thank you again, Mr. Reeves, for everything. She left him standing on the porch, staring out at the night. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Catherine felt strangely hollow, as if she were leaving something important behind, something she'd only just discovered. The stagecoach journey to Silver Creek was every bit as uncomfortable as Jack had warned. Catherine spent 3 days jolting over rutted roads, squeezed between Mr. Simmons and the coach wall. The spring rains had indeed turned sections of the trail to mud, forcing the passengers to disembark several times while the driver navigated particularly treacherous stretches. Despite the discomfort, Catherine was grateful for the Simmonses' company. Mrs. Simmons was a motherly woman who shared her food and filled the long hours with stories of her children back in Cheyenne. Mr. Simmons proved knowledgeable about ranching operations and offered useful insights about what Catherine might expect at Thornton's. Fine man, James Thornton, he told her as they approached Silver Creek on the 3rd day. Started with nothing 20 years ago. Now runs one of the most respected outfits in the territory. Do you know if he has family? Catherine asked. Her father's letters had mentioned Thornton's wife had passed years before, but little else about his personal situation. Widower, Mr. Simmons confirmed. Has a daughter about your age, I believe. Rebecca or Rachel, something like that. The information was reassuring. At least there would be another young woman at the ranch. Catherine had been concerned about propriety, arriving alone at an establishment run by her father's bachelor friend. Silver Creek came into view as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. It was larger than Whispering Pines, with a proper main street lined with 2-story buildings, many constructed of brick rather than wood. Catherine counted 2 hotels, a bank, and numerous businesses as the stage rolled down the street. More civilized than most frontier towns, Mrs. Simmons commented, noting Catherine's interest. Silver Creek's become something of a commercial center for this part of Wyoming. The stage stopped outside the Silver Creek Hotel, where Mr. and Mrs. Simmons would be staying. As they disembarked, Mr. Simmons addressed the driver. How far to Thornton Ranch from here? About 5 miles north, the driver replied, hauling down luggage from the roof. Nice place. White fences, big house on the hill. Catherine collected her trunk, suddenly uncertain. She had sent no word ahead to announce her arrival. What if Mr. Thornton was away? What if he didn't remember his promise to her father? "I'll need to hire a wagon," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "Nonsense," Mrs. Simmons declared. "You'll stay with us tonight. My husband can send word to Mr. Thornton that you've arrived and proper arrangements can be made for tomorrow." Relief washed over Catherine. "That's very kind of you." "Not at all, dear. I wouldn't dream of sending you off to a strange ranch at this hour." The hotel was comfortable, if not luxurious. After 3 days of travel, the prospect of a real bed and a hot bath seemed like the height of civilization to Catherine. She soaked away the dust of the journey, changed into her last clean dress, and joined the Simmonses for dinner in the hotel's dining room. They were halfway through their meal when a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. A tall man with silver-streaked black hair and an impressive mustache stood in the doorway, scanning the room with purpose. His clothes were expensive but practical, the attire of a successful rancher. "James Thornton," Mr. Simmons identified him quietly. "Speak of the devil." Thornton spotted them and strode across the room, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. He stopped at their table, his eyes fixed on Catherine. "Miss Blackwood?" he asked. Catherine rose, extending her hand. "Mr. Thornton, it's a pleasure to meet you at last." He clasped her hand firmly. "When I received word that Henry Blackwood's daughter had arrived in Silver Creek alone, I came immediately." His gaze swept the dining room. "Where is your father?" Catherine's carefully maintained composure wavered. "Perhaps we could speak privately, sir." Understanding dawned in Thornton's eyes. He nodded gravely. "Of course." He looked to the Simmonses. "Edward, Margaret, good to see you both. Would you excuse us?" They moved to a secluded corner of the hotel lobby, where Catherine related the events of the past week, the attack, her father's death, and her journey to Silver Creek. She omitted any mention of Jack Reeves's wanted status, describing him simply as a passing cowboy who had offered assistance. Thornton listened in shocked silence, his weathered face growing grimmer with each detail. When she finished, he shook his head slowly. "Henry was one of the finest men I ever knew," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If not for him, I'd have died at Gettysburg, never seen my daughter grow up, never built my ranch." He met Catherine's gaze directly. "The place he saved for you both is still waiting, Miss Blackwood. My home is yours for as long as you wish it." Catherine blinked back tears. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I wasn't certain you'd remember the offer." "A Thornton never forgets a debt," he replied firmly. "We'll leave for the ranch first thing tomorrow. Tonight you rest. Everything else can wait." True to his word, James Thornton arrived at the hotel the following morning with a fine buggy drawn by 2 matched bays. Catherine bid farewell to the Simmonses with genuine gratitude, promising to welcome them at the ranch when their business in town was concluded. The drive to Thornton Ranch took them through rolling grassland, dotted with spring wildflowers. As they crested a hill, Catherine caught her first glimpse of what would be her new home, a sprawling 2-story house painted white with green shutters, surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and indeed, the white fences the stage driver had mentioned. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Thornton nodded with quiet pride. "Took 20 years to build it up from nothing. Started with 50 acres and 10 scrawny cattle. Now it's 15,000 acres and 5,000 head." He glanced at her. "Your father could have been part of it from the beginning." "I asked him to join me after the war, but he had other plans then. He wanted to return to my mother," Catherine explained. They'd only been married a year when the war broke out. A good choice, Thornton acknowledged. Family should come first. He guided the horses through the main gate. Speaking of family, my daughter Rachel is eager to meet you. She's around your age, 22 this summer. I'm 20, Catherine offered. It will be nice to have company close to my age. They pulled up before the house, where a slender young woman with her father's dark hair waited on the porch. Rachel Thornton rushed down the steps as they arrived, her smile warm and welcoming. "You must be Catherine," she exclaimed. "I'm so glad you're here," though heartbroken about the circumstances. She clasped Catherine's hands. "Father says you're to stay as long as you like, and I hope that's a very long time. I've been desperate for female companionship out here." Catherine found herself returning Rachel's smile despite her lingering grief. "Thank you for the welcome. Come inside," Rachel urged. "I've prepared the blue bedroom for you. It has the best view of the mountains. Mrs. Martinez has luncheon almost ready, and you must be famished after your journey." As Rachel led her into the house, chattering about the ranch and its routines, Catherine felt a small spark of hope ignite within her. Perhaps here, among these kind people who had valued her father, she might eventually find a place to belong. The following weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and gradual healing. Catherine found the Thorntons to be genuinely welcoming, integrating her into their household with sensitivity to her grief. Rachel proved to be exactly the friend Catherine needed, cheerful without being overbearing, respectful of Catherine's quiet moments, and eager to share the rhythms of ranch life. James Thornton was a fair but demanding ranch owner who commanded respect from his cowboys through competence rather than intimidation. He treated Catherine with fatherly concern, often inviting her to accompany him as he made his daily rounds of the property. "Your father would want you to understand the operation," he explained, "in case you decide to stay permanently." Catherine appreciated his practicality. Though she had no experience with ranching, she found herself increasingly interested in the business aspects. Her education in Boston had included bookkeeping, and she soon began helping Thornton organize his accounts, which had been somewhat neglected. "You have a head for numbers," he commented one evening as they finished reviewing the quarterly profits. "That's valuable in this business." "I enjoy the work," Catherine admitted. "It feels good to be useful." Thornton nodded approvingly. "You're welcome to take on as much responsibility as you want here. This place will need new blood to run it someday." Catherine understood the implicit message. Thornton had no sons, and Rachel, while capable, had little interest in the business side of ranching. She was being offered a potential future, perhaps even an inheritance of sorts, if she chose to remain. The possibility was both flattering and daunting. Catherine wasn't sure she was ready to commit to a permanent life in Wyoming, but she was grateful for the option. May turned to June, and the ranch bustled with activity as roundup began. Cowboys returned from their line camps. Temporary hands were hired, and the house became a center of constant motion as Mrs. Martinez and her kitchen staff fed the hungry crew. Catherine found herself oddly drawn to the corrals where the men worked with horses and cattle. She would often take a break from her bookkeeping to watch the cowboys at their tasks, finding something mesmerizing in the fluid partnership between skilled riders and their mounts. "Thinking of learning to ride?" Rachel asked one afternoon, finding Catherine perched on a fence rail. "Perhaps," Catherine admitted. "I can ride, but not like that." She nodded toward a cowboy who was expertly cutting a calf from the herd. "That's Miguel," Rachel identified him. "One of our best. He could teach you if you're interested." "Maybe." Catherine wasn't sure why she hesitated. Something about the idea of learning to ride properly appealed to her, yet she felt a strange reluctance. Rachel studied her thoughtfully. You know, we're having the summer dance next Saturday. Cowboys from all the neighboring ranches will be here. It might be a good chance for you to meet more people. Catherine hadn't given much thought to socializing beyond the ranch. Will I need something special to wear? Nothing fancy, Rachel assured her. Though I have several dresses you're welcome to borrow if you like. The prospect of an evening of music and dancing was appealing. Catherine had enjoyed such events in Boston, though she imagined a ranch dance would be quite different from the formal affairs she was accustomed to. I'll look forward to it, she decided. The week leading up to the dance was filled with preparations. The large barn was cleared and decorated with lanterns and wildflowers. Tables were set up for food and drink, and a small platform was constructed for the musicians, a fiddler, guitarist, and accordion player from town. By Saturday evening, wagons and riders began arriving from neighboring ranches. Catherine watched from her bedroom window as cowboys in their best clothes, clean shirts, polished boots, and Sunday hats gathered in the yard below. Rachel had lent her a pretty blue dress that complemented Catherine's blonde hair and fair complexion. As they descended to join the festivities, Catherine felt a flutter of nerves. These would be the first new people she'd met since arriving at the ranch, and she was conscious of her status as both a newcomer and an Easterner. The barn was transformed by lantern light. The rough-hewn space softened into something almost magical. Music filled the air and couples already swirled across the makeshift dance floor. James Thornton stood near the entrance, greeting his guests with the easy confidence of a respected host. "Catherine," he called when he spotted her, "come meet some of our neighbors." She was introduced to a succession of ranchers and their families, names and faces blurring together until she found herself beside a refreshment table, catching her breath. "Not quite like Boston dances, I'd wager," came a familiar voice from behind her. Catherine froze, a cup of punch halfway to her lips. She knew that voice had heard it in her dreams more often than she cared to admit over the past weeks. Slowly, she turned. Jack Reeves stood before her, looking startlingly different in clean clothes, a white shirt, dark vest, and pressed trousers. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd shaved his stubble to reveal a strong jawline. Only his eyes were unchanged, that same intense blue that seemed to see right through her. "Mr. Reeves," she managed, her voice barely audible over the music. "What are you doing here?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I work here," he said simply. "Have done for almost a year now." Catherine stared at him in disbelief. "You work for Mr. Thornton, but you said that I had ranch work north of Whispering Pines," Jack finished for her. "This is north of Whispering Pines. But why didn't you tell me?" Catherine demanded, struggling to keep her voice low. "You knew I was coming here." Jack glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Would you have believed me if I'd said I worked on the very ranch you were headed to? Or would you have thought I was following you with ill intent?" Catherine had to admit he had a point. Given what she'd learned about his wanted status, she likely would have been suspicious of such a coincidence. "Does Mr. Thornton know?" she asked. "About the bounty on your head?" "Yes," Jack confirmed. "He's known from the beginning, hired me anyway." Before Catherine could respond, the music changed to a lively reel and Rachel appeared at her elbow. "Catherine, you must dance," she insisted, then noticed Jack. "Oh, Mr. Reeves, I didn't realize you were back from the North Pasture." "Just returned this afternoon, Miss Thornton," Jack replied politely. Rachel looked between them with sudden interest. "Do you two know each other?" Jack met Catherine's gaze, a silent question in his eyes. "We've met," Catherine said carefully. "Mr. Reeves was of assistance to me after my father's death." Rachel's eyes widened. "Jack was the cowboy who helped you. You never mentioned his name before." It didn't seem important at the time, Catherine replied, though the lie felt hollow. Well, this is perfect, Rachel declared. Jack, you must dance with Catherine. She doesn't know anyone here. Jack hesitated, his eyes still on Catherine's face. If Miss Blackwood is willing. Catherine knew she should refuse. Dancing with Jack Reeves would invite attention, spark gossip, yet she found herself nodding. Yes, I'd like that. Jack offered his hand and Catherine placed her fingers in his palm. The simple contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, like touching a lightning rod during a storm. From his slight intake of breath, she suspected he felt it too. He led her onto the dance floor as the musicians began a waltz. Jack's hand settled at her waist, maintaining a proper distance between them as they began to move with the music. You dance well for an outlaw, Catherine observed, keeping her voice low. Jack's mouth twitched. My mother believed every gentleman should know how to waltz, regardless of his profession. And what is your profession, Mr. Reeves? Cowboy or bandit? Former bandit, he corrected. Current cowboy. Mr. Thornton's foreman, in fact. Catherine missed a step in surprise. His foreman. But that's a position of considerable trust, Jack finished for her. Yes, James Thornton is a good judge of character, like Sheriff Mills. They circled the floor in silence for a moment, Catherine absorbing this new information. Jack was not merely a ranch hand but Thornton's right-hand man, responsible for overseeing the entire operation when the owner was absent. He doesn't care about your past, she finally asked. He cares about who I am now, Jack replied. About the work I do, the decisions I make. His hand tightened slightly at her waist as he guided her through a turn. Just as I hope you might. The music ended before Catherine could formulate a response. Jack released her and stepped back, his expression unreadable once more. Thank you for the dance, Miss Blackwood, he said formally, then turned and walked away, leaving Catherine standing alone in the middle of the floor. For the remainder of the evening, Catherine was hyper-aware of Jack's presence as he moved through the crowd, speaking with cowboys, ranchers, and their families. He danced with several women, including Rachel, but did not approach Catherine again. By the time the last wagon departed and the musicians packed away their instruments, Catherine's emotions were a tangled mess. She climbed the stairs to her room, hoping Rachel wouldn't follow with inevitable questions, but her friend appeared moments later, eyes bright with curiosity. You never told me Jack Reeves was your mysterious rescuer, Rachel said, perching on Catherine's bed. Why keep it a secret? Catherine sighed, removing her borrowed earrings. It's complicated, Rachel. He's handsome, Rachel continued undeterred, and single. Half the eligible women in the county have set their caps for him, but he's never shown interest in any of them. She gave Catherine a meaningful look. Until tonight, perhaps. You're imagining things, Catherine protested. Mr. Reeves was simply being polite. Rachel snorted delicately. Jack Reeves doesn't dance to be polite. He dances when my father orders him to be sociable, and even then he usually manages to avoid it. She studied Catherine's face. Something happened between you two before you came here. What was it? Catherine hesitated, then decided a partial truth was necessary. Mr. Reeves helped me after the attack on our wagon. He was kind when I needed kindness. But then I learned some things about his past that concerned me. The wanted poster, Rachel nodded knowingly. Everyone knows about that. Father says it's nonsense that Jack was framed by some corrupt officials in Colorado. Your father seems very certain of Mr. Reeves's character, Catherine observed. Jack saved his life, Rachel said simply. 2 years ago, rustlers attacked Father when he was riding alone. Shot him and left him for dead. Jack found him, got him home, then tracked down the rustlers single-handed and brought them to justice. She smiled faintly. Father says that repaid any debt society might think Jack owes. The revelation added yet another layer to Catherine's complex feelings about Jack Reeves. The man seemed to make a habit of rescuing people in dire circumstances, regardless of personal risk. "I don't know what to think of him," Catherine admitted. Rachel's expression softened. "Then perhaps you should talk to him outside of a crowded dance floor. He rides the east pasture most mornings, checking the new calves." She rose, heading for the door. "Just a thought. Good night, Catherine." Alone, Catherine moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit ranch yard. Somewhere out there, Jack Reeves was probably still awake, perhaps in the bunkhouse with the other cowboys, or maybe in separate quarters befitting his position as foreman. She had spent weeks trying not to think about him, convincing herself that their brief encounter had been meaningful only because of the extreme circumstances. Yet seeing him tonight had brought all those confused feelings rushing back with even greater force. Morning found Catherine riding east on a gentle mare borrowed from the ranch stable. She had risen early, dressing in the practical split skirt and blouse that Rachel had convinced her to have made in town. The outfit allowed her to ride astride rather than side saddle, offering greater freedom of movement and control. The eastern pasture stretched for miles, dotted with cattle and the occasional stand of cottonwoods along a meandering creek. Catherine scanned the horizon, wondering if she was being foolish. Jack might be anywhere on the vast property, or perhaps not even working this section today. Then she spotted him, a solitary figure on horseback, moving slowly among a group of cows and calves. Even at a distance, she recognized the set of his shoulders and the way he sat his horse. Catherine urged her mare forward, her heart beating faster as she approached. Jack noticed her when she was still some distance away, straightening in his saddle and watching her come. He made no move to meet her, simply waiting as she drew near. "Miss Blackwood," he greeted her, removing his hat briefly. "This is a surprise." "Mr. Reeves," she returned, reining in beside him. "Rachel mentioned you might be working this section today, did she now?" A hint of amusement touched his features. "Miss Thornton has a tendency to meddle. She means well," Catherine defended her friend. "Most meddlers do." Jack replaced his hat, studying her. "That outfit suits you, more practical than Boston fashions for ranch life." "Thank you." Catherine gathered her courage. "I came to apologize." Jack's eyebrows rose. "For what?" "For judging you based on a poster and rumors without giving you a chance to explain." He was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "No apology needed. You were right to be cautious." He shifted in his saddle. "Would you like to ride with me while I finish checking these calves? We can talk more freely." Catherine nodded, and they fell into step together, their horses moving at a companionable walk through the herd. Jack pointed out new calves, explaining which bloodlines they represented and their prospects for the fall market. Catherine listened, asking occasional questions that revealed her growing knowledge of ranch operations. "You've learned a lot in a short time," Jack observed. "Mr. Thornton has been patient in teaching me," Catherine replied, "and I find I enjoy the work more than I expected." "Will you stay then?" Jack asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Make this your home?" Catherine considered the question. "I'm not certain yet, Mr. Thornton has been generous in his offers, but it's not what you planned," Jack finished for her. "Nothing has been what I planned since the day my father died," Catherine admitted. "I'm still finding my footing." They reached the creek, and Jack suggested they rest the horses. He dismounted easily and came around to help Catherine down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent that same strange current through her, and she stepped back quickly once her feet touched the ground. They settled on a fallen log while the horses drank from the clear water. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft sounds of the prairie rustling grass, birds calling, the occasional lowing of cattle. "Why did you help me that day?" Catherine finally asked the question that had haunted her for weeks. "The truth, please." Jack gazed out over the pasture. "I was tracking those outlaws already," he said after a moment. "They'd hit 2 other wagons that week. When I heard the shots, I rode toward them, but I was too late for your father." He looked at her directly. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do. Because you needed help. There's no more to it than that. And you didn't tell me you worked for Thornton because I didn't want you to fear I was following you," Jack replied honestly, "and because I wasn't sure how James would react to the connection." "He's protective of his household," Catherine nodded slowly. "He speaks very highly of you, says you're the best foreman he's ever had." A ghost of a smile touched Jack's lips. "High praise from a demanding man." "Rachel told me how you saved his life," Catherine continued. "It seems you make a habit of rescuing people, Mr. Reeves." "Jack," he corrected gently. "After all this, you might as well use my name." "Jack," she echoed, surprised by how natural it felt. "And I'm Catherine," he nodded, his blue eyes warming. "Catherine." They sat in silence again, but it was different now, charged with something neither seemed ready to name. Catherine was acutely aware of his proximity, of the breadth of his shoulders and the strength in his hands as he absently twirled a stem of grass between his fingers. "I should return to the ranch," she said finally, rising from the log. "Mr. Thornton asked for my help with the supply inventories today." Jack stood, towering over her. "I'll ride back with you. This section is clear anyway." He helped her mount, his touch lingering a heartbeat longer than necessary before he swung into his own saddle. They rode side by side, the silence between them comfortable now, filled with unspoken possibilities. As they approached the ranch, Catherine glanced at her companion. "Will you be at supper tonight? In the main house?" Jack shook his head. "I'm riding to the north boundary this afternoon. Won't be back until late." Disappointment flickered through Catherine, surprising her with its intensity. "Another time, then." He studied her face, as if memorizing its features. "Another time," he agreed, his voice a low promise that stayed with her long after they parted ways at the stable. Summer unfolded across the Wyoming landscape, turning the prairie to gold and filling the days with endless activity. Catherine fell into the rhythms of ranch life with increasing ease, dividing her time between helping James Thornton with the business aspects and learning practical skills from Rachel and the ranch hands. She saw Jack regularly, but rarely alone. He attended Sunday dinners at the main house, as was customary for the foreman, and occasionally joined them for other meals when ranch business required his presence. Catherine found herself looking forward to these encounters, stealing glances at him across the table, savoring the rare moments when their conversations extended beyond the practical matters of cattle and horses. July brought a heat wave that made everyone irritable. The creek that ran through the eastern pasture dwindled to a trickle, forcing the cowboys to drive cattle miles to the river for water. Catherine watched the ranch hands return each evening, dust-covered and exhausted, and felt useless in her comparative comfort. "I want to help," she told James Thornton one evening as they watched the men trudge toward the bunkhouse. "Surely there's something more practical I can do than balancing ledgers." Thornton regarded her thoughtfully. "You're serious about learning ranch work?" "Yes," Catherine replied firmly. "I can't just sit in the house while everyone else works themselves to exhaustion." "It's hard, dirty work," Thornton warned. "Not what you were raised for." Catherine lifted her chin. "Neither was losing my father and traveling alone across the country, yet here I am." A smile creased Thornton's weathered face. "Fair point." He nodded toward the corral. "Jack's breaking that new bay gelding for ranch work. He could use a hand tomorrow moving the 2-year-olds to the south pasture. If you're serious, ask him. Catherine didn't wait for morning. She found Jack at the corral as dusk settled over the ranch, watching as he worked patiently with a spirited young horse. She stood quietly by the fence, admiring the fluid communication between man and animal, the subtle signals, the building trust. When Jack finally led the bay to the gate, he didn't seem surprised to see her waiting. "Evening, Catherine," he greeted her, removing his gloves. "What brings you out here?" "Mr. Thornton said you could use help tomorrow with the 2-year-olds," she replied directly. "I'd like to volunteer." Jack's eyebrows rose. "That's a full day's hard ride." "I'm aware," Catherine said. "I'm stronger than I look, and I'm a quick learner." He studied her face, seeming to weigh her determination. "You'll need a better horse than that mare you've been riding. And proper clothes, pants, not a split skirt." "Rachel has spare denims I can borrow," Catherine countered. "And I'm sure Mr. Thornton can recommend a suitable mount." A slow smile spread across Jack's face, the genuine kind that transformed his features and made something flutter in Catherine's chest. "You really want this?" "I do," she confirmed. "Then be ready at dawn," he said. "Wear a hat and bring gloves. It'll be hot work." Catherine arrived at the stable before sunrise, dressed in borrowed denims and a faded cotton shirt, her hair braided and tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Jack was already there, saddling a sturdy roan gelding. "This is Rusty," he introduced the horse. "Not flashy, but steady and trail smart. He'll take care of you." Catherine approached the gelding, offering her hand for him to sniff. "Hello, Rusty," she said softly. "We're going to be friends today." Jack watched her gentle introduction with approval. "You have a way with horses," he observed. "Natural instinct." "My grandfather raised carriage horses in Maryland," Catherine explained. "I spent summers there as a child before he passed." With Jack's assistance, she mounted and adjusted her stirrups. 3 other cowboys joined them, nodding respectfully to Catherine. She recognized Miguel, whom Rachel had pointed out weeks before, and 2 others she knew only by sight. "Miss Blackwood's riding with us today," Jack informed them, his tone making it clear this was not up for discussion. "Miguel, she'll work with you on the right flank." Miguel, a slender Mexican with an impressive mustache, tipped his hat to Catherine. "It will be my pleasure to teach the señorita." The day proved every bit as challenging as Jack had warned. The 2-year-old steers were skittish and prone to bolting, requiring constant vigilance to keep them moving in the right direction. By midday, Catherine's muscles ached from hours in the saddle, and dust coated her throat despite the bandana she wore over her nose and mouth. They stopped briefly at noon in the shade of a cottonwood grove. Jack brought Catherine a canteen of water, his eyes assessing her condition. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. Catherine took a long drink before answering honestly. "Sore in places I didn't know could be sore, but I'm managing." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "You're doing well. Better than most first-timers." High praise from a demanding man, she echoed his words from weeks before, earning a genuine chuckle. "We've got another 4 hours," Jack warned. "It gets harder in the afternoon heat." Catherine straightened her shoulders. "I'll be fine." The afternoon indeed proved more difficult. The temperature soared and the steers grew increasingly fractious. Twice, animals broke from the herd, requiring quick action to bring them back. Catherine watched in admiration as Jack and Miguel expertly cut off the escaping steers, their movements with horse and rope appearing effortless, though she knew they were anything but. By the time they reached the south pasture and secured the herd, the sun was low on the horizon. Catherine's muscles screamed in protest as she dismounted, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. Jack was at her side instantly, a steadying hand at her elbow. "Easy," he murmured. First long ride is always the hardest. Catherine managed a weak smile. I'll feel this tomorrow, won't I? And the day after, he confirmed, his eyes crinkling with amusement. But you did well. Not a complaint all day. She straightened, oddly pleased by his approval. Thank you for letting me come. Jack studied her dust-streaked face with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're not what I expected, Catherine Blackwood. What did you expect? She asked. An Easterner who'd run back to civilization at the first sign of hardship, he admitted. A temporary visitor playing at ranch life until something better came along. Catherine's chin lifted. And now, Jack's gaze held hers. Now I think James Thornton is a lucky man to have found himself an heir who understands both the books and the land. The implication that Jack saw her as a permanent fixture at the ranch, as Thornton's eventual successor, stirred complex emotions in Catherine. Before she could respond, Miguel called Jack's attention to a broken section of fence that needed immediate repair. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, everyone tired from the day's work. Catherine's body protested every movement, but a sense of accomplishment overshadowed the discomfort. She had proven herself capable, not just to Jack and the other cowboys, but to herself. As they approached the ranch in the gathering dusk, lights glowed welcomingly from the main house windows. Catherine could see Rachel on the porch, waiting anxiously. Catherine, she called, hurrying down the steps as they rode into the yard. Father said you went with the cattle drive. I've been worried sick. I'm fine, Catherine assured her, wincing as Jack helped her dismount. Tired but fine. Rachel took in her friend's disheveled appearance with wide eyes. You look like you've been dragged behind the horse rather than riding it. Jack chuckled. She rode better than most cowboys their first time out, he said, surprising Catherine with the public praise. Has a natural seat and good instincts. Rachel's gaze darted between them, a knowing gleam in her eye. Well, I've had Consuela prepare a hot bath for you. You'll need it. Catherine thanked her friend, then turned to Jack. And thank you for today, he nodded, his expression softening. Same time next week. The 3-year-olds need moving to the East Range. It was an invitation, not just to work but to continue whatever was growing between them. Catherine found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. I'll be ready. Throughout August, Catherine joined the ranch work at least twice a week, gradually building her skills and endurance. James Thornton watched her progress with evident pride, while Rachel alternated between concern for her friend's safety and thinly veiled delight at the developing relationship between Catherine and Jack. For developing it was, though neither Catherine nor Jack spoke of it directly. Their conversations deepened beyond ranch matters to personal histories and future dreams. Catherine learned that Jack had been raised in Missouri by a schoolteacher mother and a father who ran a small freight business. He'd come west at 18, working his way through various ranches before the ill-fated bank robbery in Colorado had forced him to flee further into the frontier. In turn, Catherine shared stories of her Boston childhood, her mother's long illness, and her father's dreams of a fresh start in Wyoming. Jack listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that revealed his intelligence and sensitivity beneath the tough cowboy exterior. By September, Catherine realized she had made her decision about staying at Thornton Ranch without ever consciously choosing. She had stopped thinking of Boston as home, had ceased making comparisons between East and West. The wide open spaces, the honest work, the sense of purpose all had become essential to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. And then, there was Jack, whose presence in her daily life had become as necessary as breathing. The first autumn storm arrived in late September, bringing driving rain and plummeting temperatures. Catherine stood on the covered porch of the main house, watching lightning fork across the darkened sky and worrying about the men still out with the herds. "They'll be fine," James Thornton assured her, joining her vigil. "Jack knows these storms. He'll have gotten the men to shelter." "It came on so suddenly," Catherine fretted. "They were only supposed to be checking the northern herd today." Thornton studied her concerned face. "Jack Reeves has survived worse than a September storm, Catherine." She glanced at him, wondering how much the older man had guessed about her feelings. "He's a good foreman," she said carefully. "The ranch depends on him." "Not just the ranch, I think," Thornton replied gently. Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks but didn't deny it. "We've become friends." "Friends," Thornton echoed, a knowing smile touching his lips. "Well, friendship is a fine foundation for other things." He patted her shoulder. "Jack's a good man despite his past, or perhaps because of it. He's learned hard lessons that shaped him into someone I'd trust with my life or my daughter's happiness." Catherine's eyes widened at the implication. "Mr. Thornton, I don't James," he corrected. "After all these months, I think we're past formalities." His expression grew serious. "Your father wanted you to find security and happiness here, Catherine. If Jack Reeves is part of that happiness, you'll have no objections from me." Before Catherine could formulate a response, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. Through the curtain of rain, several riders appeared, their slickers gleaming in the lightning flashes. "There they are," Thornton said with relief. "Told you Jack would get them home safe." Catherine watched as Jack dismounted, issuing instructions to the other cowboys before turning toward the main house. He caught sight of her on the porch and changed direction, jogging through the downpour to the steps. "Everyone accounted for?" Thornton asked as Jack climbed the steps, water streaming from his hat and slicker. "All present and correct," Jack confirmed. "Got the herd into the North Canyon before the worst hit. They'll weather it fine there." "Good work," Thornton nodded. "Get yourself dry before you catch your death." He retreated into the house, leaving Catherine alone with Jack. Jack removed his dripping hat, running a hand through his wet hair. "You were worried," he observed, noting her expression. "The storm came so suddenly," Catherine said, "and lightning with the herd." "Takes more than lightning to keep me from coming back," Jack said quietly, his eyes holding hers. "Especially now." "Now," Catherine echoed, her heart quickening. Jack stepped closer, close enough that she could see raindrops clinging to his eyelashes. "Now that I have a reason to come back safe every day." The simple declaration hung between them, more profound than any flowery speech could have been. Catherine's breath caught as Jack slowly raised his hand to her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. "I'm soaking wet," he murmured, "and this isn't how I planned it, but I can't wait any longer." His gaze dropped to her lips. "May I kiss you, Catherine?" In answer, she rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. Jack responded immediately, his arm circling her waist to draw her closer. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened as Catherine's hands found their way to his shoulders. She could taste rain on his lips, feel the solid strength of him against her, and knew with sudden clarity that this was where she belonged. When they finally parted, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you at that wagon," he admitted. "Even with a derringer pointed at my chest." Catherine laughed softly. "I'm glad you restrained yourself then. I might have shot you." "Worth the risk," he murmured, brushing another kiss against her lips. The squeak of the door hinges reminded them they were standing on the front porch in full view of anyone who cared to look. They stepped apart just as Rachel peeked out. "Father sent me to make sure you hadn't drowned out here," she said, her knowing smile suggesting she'd seen exactly what had transpired. "Supper's ready, and Consuela's made her famous stew perfect for a night like this." Jack cleared his throat. I should change first. These clothes are soaked through. There's a clean shirt of Father's in the mudroom, Rachel offered. He said you're to join us tonight rather than going back to your cabin. The invitation was transparent in its intention. James Thornton was officially acknowledging whatever was developing between his foreman and Catherine. Jack's surprised expression suggested he understood the significance. I'd be honored, he said formally. Give me 10 minutes to make myself presentable. Supper that evening marked a turning point. Though nothing explicit was said about Catherine and Jack's relationship, the atmosphere had shifted. James Thornton treated Jack more like family than employee, while Rachel alternated between delighted smiles and pointed questions about future ranch plans that included both Jack and Catherine. After the meal, when Rachel and her father tactfully retreated to other parts of the house, Catherine found herself alone with Jack in the parlor. Rain still drummed against the windows, creating a cocoon of intimacy as they sat before the crackling fire. Your father would approve, I think, Jack said after a comfortable silence. Of us? Catherine smiled softly. Yes, I believe he would. He valued honesty and hard work above all else. You embody both. Jack took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I can't offer you what you had in Boston, the society, the culture. I don't want those things anymore, Catherine assured him. I want this life, the ranch, the work. She met his gaze directly. You, his blue eyes darkened with emotion. I still have a price on my head in Colorado, he reminded her. It's unlikely they'll pursue it this far, but it's there. Then we'll deal with it if it ever becomes necessary, Catherine said firmly. I'm not afraid of your past, Jack. He raised her hand to his lips, placing a kiss on her knuckles. I love you, Catherine Blackwood, he said simply. Have done since that day by your father's grave, though I had no right to then. The declaration, though expected after their kiss on the porch, still made Catherine's heart sore. I love you too, she replied, the words feeling natural and true. Though I fought against it for the longest time. Jack smiled, the firelight softening his features. Stubborn woman. You wouldn't want me any other way, she countered. No, he agreed, drawing her closer. I wouldn't change a single thing about you. This time when they kissed, it held the promise of a shared future, one built on the foundation of that strange first meeting when she declared, I don't even know you, and he had replied with what now seemed like prophetic certainty. You don't have to yet. The following weeks passed in a haze of happiness for Catherine. Her relationship with Jack blossomed openly, with the full approval of James and Rachel Thornton. Though they maintained propriety, Jack still lived in his cabin near the bunkhouse, and Catherine in the main house. They spent most daylight hours together, working side by side on ranch operations. October brought cattle sales and the annual accounting that Catherine now managed with confident efficiency. Jack accompanied James Thornton to Cheyenne for the livestock auction, returning with news of excellent prices and the ranch's best profit in 5 years. Your record-keeping made all the difference, Thornton told Catherine over celebration dinner. Buyers pay premium prices when they can see the bloodlines and health records clearly documented. Catherine has a gift for organization, Jack added, his proud smile warming her from across the table. The ranch has never run more smoothly. Late one crisp afternoon in early November, Jack invited Catherine for a ride to what he called his thinking spot, a ridge overlooking the entire ranch property. They set out after the day's work was complete, Jack on his chestnut stallion and Catherine on Rusty, who had become her regular mount. The ridge offered a spectacular view of the ranch below and the mountains beyond, gilded now in the light of the setting sun. Jack spread a blanket on a flat rock and they sat together, shoulders touching as they watched the play of light across the landscape. "It's beautiful," Catherine breathed. "I can see why you come here to think." Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I found this spot my first week working for James. Used to ride up here and wonder if I'd ever outrun my past." He glanced at her. "If I'd ever find a place that felt like home again." "And have you?" Catherine asked softly. "Home isn't just a place," Jack replied, taking her hand. "It's the people who make you feel like you belong." His blue eyes held hers. "You make me feel that way, Catherine." Before she could respond, Jack reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. Catherine's breath caught as he opened his palm to reveal a simple gold ring with a modest diamond. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she passed, said to save it for the woman who made me want to be a better man." He took a deep breath. "That's you, Catherine. It's always been you, even before I knew you existed." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes as Jack slid from the blanket to one knee before her. "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards," he continued, "but I've loved you since that first day when you pointed that little derringer at me with more courage than sense." His smile was tender. "Will you marry me, Catherine Blackwood? Make a life with me here, build something lasting together?" "Yes," Catherine whispered, then louder. "Yes, Jack Reeves, I will marry you." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Jack rose, pulling Catherine to her feet and into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Jack pressed his forehead to hers. "James already knows I plan to ask you, gave his blessing last week." "Of course he did," Catherine laughed softly. "Rachel probably helped you pick the spot." "She suggested a dozen more romantic locations," Jack admitted with a grin. "But this place means something to me. I wanted to share it with you." They lingered on the ridge until twilight deepened into night, planning their future together. They would marry in December, after the fall work was complete. Jack would continue as foreman, while Catherine would expand her role in the business operations. Eventually, they would build their own house on ranch land, though James had insisted they stay in the main house initially. "He says the place is too big for just him and Rachel," Jack explained. "Thinks of you as a daughter already." Catherine felt a rush of gratitude for the family she had found here, not replacements for what she had lost, but new connections that had healed her grief and given her purpose. As they rode back to the ranch under a canopy of stars, Catherine thought of her father. He had dreamed of bringing her to a new life in Wyoming, never imagining the path that dream would take. Yet somehow, she had found exactly what he had wished for her: security, purpose, and love. Rachel's excited squeal when they returned, and she spotted the ring echoed across the ranch yard. Within minutes, the entire household knew of the engagement. James Thornton opened his best whiskey, and Consuela produced a special dessert as an impromptu celebration filled the dining room. "To Catherine and Jack," Thornton proposed the toast, his weathered face alight with genuine happiness. "May your years together be as countless as the stars and as blessed as this land." Catherine looked around the table at the faces of those who had become her family in just 6 months: Rachel, beaming with delight; James, proud as any father; the ranch hands who had accepted and taught her; and Jack, whose love had transformed her life in ways she was still discovering. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you, for making this place home." Jack's hand found hers under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt like a promise not just for their future, but for the present moment of perfect belonging. 3 weeks before Christmas, with snow dusting the Wyoming landscape, Catherine Blackwood became Catherine Reeves in a ceremony held in the main house parlor. James Thornton had insisted on sparing no expense, turning the ranch home into a winter wonderland of evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candlelight. Catherine wore a gown of ivory satin that Rachel had helped design, ordering the fabric from Denver and working with the local seamstress to create something both elegant and suited to Catherine's simple taste. Her honey blonde hair was arranged in soft curls beneath a veil of delicate lace that had once belonged to Mrs. Thornton. Jack waited for her before the stone fireplace, looking almost unrecognizable in a new black suit. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven, but his blue eyes were unchanged, still capable of looking straight into her soul. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, conducted by the circuit preacher who had arrived the previous day. Catherine and Jack had written their own vows, simple promises of love, respect, and partnership that reflected their practical natures while acknowledging the depth of their feelings. "I take you as my partner in all things," Jack pledged, his voice steady though his eyes revealed his emotion. "To stand beside you in good times and bad, to build a life worthy of the trust you've placed in me, and to love you faithfully all the days of my life." Catherine's answering vows brought tears to Rachel's eyes and a suspicious moisture to James Thornton's weathered cheeks. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jack's kiss was reverent and tender, a public declaration of private devotion. The celebration continued well into the evening, with ranch hands and neighbors joining for a feast and dancing in the barn, decorated as elaborately as the house. Catherine and Jack moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and good wishes from the community that had embraced them both. "Happy," Jack murmured during a quiet moment, his arm secure around her waist. Catherine looked up at her husband, the words still new and thrilling, and felt the absolute certainty of her answer. "Completely," she replied. "Are you?" Jack's smile was answer enough, but he added, "More than I ever thought possible." As midnight approached, they slipped away from the celebration to the small cabin at the edge of the property that would be their temporary home until spring, when construction would begin on their permanent residence. Jack had spent weeks preparing the cabin, adding comforts and personal touches to make it welcoming for his bride. Catherine paused on the threshold, suddenly shy despite the months of growing intimacy between them. Jack sensed her hesitation and swept her into his arms, carrying her across the doorway. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reeves," he said softly, setting her gently on her feet inside. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting golden light over the simple but comfortable furnishings. Evergreen boughs decorated the mantel, filling the air with their fresh scent. It was modest compared to the main house, but to Catherine, it was perfect. "It's lovely, Jack," she said sincerely, turning to face him. "Truly." He cupped her face in his hands, his expression tender. "You're what makes it home," he told her. "Everything else is just details." Their kiss deepened with a new urgency, months of restrained desire finally finding expression in the privacy of their marriage. Jack's hands were gentle as he helped Catherine with the tiny buttons of her wedding gown, his reverence for her evident in every touch. Later, lying in his arms before the dying fire, Catherine traced the scar through Jack's right eyebrow, the identifying mark from that long-ago wanted poster. "I was so afraid of you once," she murmured. "Now I can't imagine feeling safer than I do with you." Jack caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I was afraid too," he admitted. "Afraid I wasn't worthy of you, of this second chance." "You are," Catherine assured him. "We both are." They fell asleep as the fire burned to embers, wrapped in each other's arms and the promise of all the days to come. Spring brought new life to Thornton Ranch calves in the pastures. green shoots pushing through the soil, and the beginning of construction on Jack and Catherine's permanent home. James Thornton had gifted them 50 acres on the eastern edge of the property, with views of both the mountains and the valley, close enough to the main operations but far enough for privacy. He'd explained with a wink that had made Catherine blush and Jack laugh. Catherine threw herself into the planning with enthusiasm, working with Jack to design a house that would meet their needs now and in the future. It would be modest to start 4 bedrooms, a study, kitchen, and generous living areas, but built with an eye toward expansion as their family grew. Family was very much on Catherine's mind as April turned to May. She had suspected for several weeks but waited until she was certain before sharing the news with Jack. She chose a quiet evening when they had ridden to their ridge to watch the sunset, something that had become a monthly tradition since their engagement. "I have something to tell you," she said, as they sat side by side on their blanket. The valley spread below them in the golden light. Jack turned to her, his expression curious. "What is it?" Catherine took his hand and placed it gently against her still flat stomach. "We'll need that nursery sooner than we planned," she said softly. "The baby should arrive around Christmas." Jack's face transformed with wonder and joy. "A baby?" he whispered, his hand spreading protectively over her abdomen. "You're sure?" Catherine nodded, her own happiness reflected in his eyes. "Dr. Winters confirmed it yesterday." Jack gathered her carefully into his arms as if she had suddenly become fragile. "A family," he murmured against her hair. "Our family. The first of many, I hope," Catherine said, smiling through happy tears. "As many as you want," Jack promised, kissing her with tender passion. "Though perhaps we should master raising one before we plan too many more." They lingered on the ridge longer than usual that evening, making plans and dreaming of their child's future. Jack insisted they would need to accelerate the house construction to ensure it was complete before winter, while Catherine laughingly reminded him that babies didn't require their own rooms immediately. "Still," Jack said, his arm secure around her shoulders as they rode home in the gathering dusk, "I want everything perfect for both of you." The news of Catherine's pregnancy was received with delight at the main house. Rachel immediately began planning baby clothes and nursery decorations, while James Thornton walked around for days with a proud smile, as if he were to become a grandfather in truth as well as spirit. As her pregnancy progressed, Catherine maintained her work with the ranch accounts, but gradually reduced her physical activities on Jack's insistence. He fussed over her in ways that both amused and touched her, ensuring she rested regularly and ate well. "You're worse than a mother hen," she teased him one afternoon as he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry she was perfectly capable of managing. "Just taking care of what matters most," he replied, unrepentant. By October, their new home was complete enough to move in, though finishing touches would continue through the winter. The large master bedroom offered views of the sunrise, while the nursery adjoined it on one side. Jack had surprised Catherine by commissioning a craftsman in Cheyenne to build a cradle of polished oak, intricately carved with wildflowers and horses. "It's beautiful," Catherine said when he unveiled it, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Our child will cherish it someday." "And pass it down to their children," Jack added, his hand resting on her now prominent belly. "The start of a family tradition." As winter settled over Wyoming once more, bringing with it the anniversary of their first meeting, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the devastating loss of her father to finding love and creating new life, she had experienced the full spectrum of human emotion. On a snowy evening just 3 days before Christmas, as Catherine sat by the fire in their new home, the first pains began. Jack, who had barely left her side in the final weeks, sent a ranch hand galloping to town for the doctor and another to the main house for Rachel. "It's too early," Catherine said, trying to remain calm despite the increasing discomfort. "The baby's not due for another week." "Babies have their own schedules," Jack replied, his voice steady though his eyes betrayed his concern. "Dr. Winters said first babies often come early." The labor progressed rapidly, faster than anyone had anticipated. Rachel arrived with Consuela before the doctor, both women immediately taking charge with practiced efficiency. Jack refused to leave Catherine's side, holding her hand through each contraction and whispering encouragement. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," he told her as the pains intensified. "You can do this." Catherine clung to his strength and to the love in his eyes, focusing on the life they would soon welcome rather than the pain of bringing it into the world. When Dr. Winters finally arrived, bundled against the snow and looking harried from his rushed journey, the birth was already well advanced. "This little one's in a hurry," he commented after examining Catherine. "Not much longer now." True to his prediction, their daughter entered the world less than an hour later, announcing her arrival with a lusty cry that brought tears to Jack's eyes. The doctor placed the tiny, red-faced infant on Catherine's chest, where she immediately quieted, blinking up at her parents with unfocused blue eyes. "She's perfect," Jack whispered, his finger gently stroking the downy blonde hair on their daughter's head. "Just like her mother." Catherine looked up at her husband, seeing in his face all the love and wonder she felt herself. "What shall we call her?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one. Jack studied their daughter thoughtfully. "Hope," he suggested. "Because that's what she represents, everything we hoped for, everything we'll hope for her." "Hope," Catherine echoed, the name feeling right on her lips. "Hope Elizabeth Reeves." As Rachel and Consuela busied themselves with the practical necessities of the birth and Dr. Winters packed his equipment, Jack settled beside Catherine on the bed, his arm around her shoulders as they both gazed at their miraculous daughter. "Thank you," he said softly, pressing a kiss to Catherine's temple. "For everything you've given me: love, family, purpose." Catherine leaned into his embrace, cradling hope against her heart. "We gave those things to each other," she corrected gently. "And now to her." Outside, snow fell silently, blanketing the Wyoming landscape in pristine white. Inside the warm bedroom of the house they had built together, Jack and Catherine Reeves held their newborn daughter and marveled at how completely their lives had been transformed in the span of a single year. "From that first encounter, I don't even know you," she had said, and his reply, "You don't have to," yet, to this moment of perfect belonging, they had traveled a road neither could have imagined. What had begun in tragedy had blossomed into a love story neither would trade for all the riches in the world. As baby Hope drifted to sleep in her mother's arms, secure in the knowledge that she was deeply loved, Catherine gazed up at her husband and saw in his eyes the promise of all the years to come, years of partnership, growth, challenges overcome together, and joy shared in equal measure. "I love you, Jack Reeves," she whispered. His smile, tender and true, was the same one that had first touched her heart on that long-ago day. "And I love you, Catherine Reeves," he replied. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow." Outside their window, the first star of evening appeared through a break in the clouds, shining bright and clear over the home they had made, and the life they would continue to build together, a beacon of possibility in the vast Wyoming sky.